2001, about 30% of the clients refused any reference to religion at their weddings. A decade later, 80% of their clients chose a carefully God-free ceremony. The only faith they pledge is in each other. No higher authority is consulted as they vow to walk beside each other, offering courage and hope through all your endeavors. A lot of people just aren't on a spiritual path, they say. We're just focusing on the party, or they have no language for their spirituality, so they just leave it out.
So not necessarily the party as in political, just like really the party about life.
You know what I find interesting so far in what we've read? All the negative comments for those people that don't want to have any spirituality or God in their life are coming from religious people, in which it should. They're coming from ministers, preachers, people who are involved in religion one way or the other in their job. I mean, look at this. Everybody who's had a negative comment about the people who have no God in their life are people who are employed somehow in a religious institution or a religious position.
Well, one of the things, you know, as I read that and I go for the God-free, I don't know how it is, but as I look at it in Judaism, whether you believe or not believe, it's tradition. It's a traditional ceremony that your parents went through exactly with the same words, essentially. Okay, so it isn't a matter of, you know, your belief or not belief, as, you know, it was said on Fiddler on the Loop, tradition.
Right, so this whole argument is kind of a Christian-based argument that losing religion is exactly equivalent to losing faith.
So we still have to get to the Jewish section, which is a few more paragraphs down the way. Don, you want to do the next paragraph, and then
Sure.
after that,
When church historian Diane Butler Bass researched her upcoming book, Christianity After Religion, The End of Church and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening, she found the so whats are a growing category. Says Bass, we can't understand the power of the collapse.
we can't underestimate.
We can't underestimate, which is Sandy mentioned, power of the collapse of institutional religion in the first 10 years of this century. It's read so many people to say they don't really care. They don't miss rituals or traditions they may never have had anyway. I have a lot of problem with that because tradition, you know, to have a traditional meal at a particular event or whatever, you know, I watch Blue Bloods and they have a family meal. It's a tradition. It has nothing necessarily to do with religion. Tradition is simply your roots and how you tie back to your family and ancestors.
And some people apparently didn't have any.
But
Is
there
kind
are
of
so
what they don't
many,
miss what they didn't have anyway.
In my son's classes in public school, 50% of kids had only one parent at home.
Right,
Okay?
right.
Now, how
The
many
demographics are certainly
demographics
changing.
are changing
Yes.
so much that, I mean, who is ever now dating Jew to Jew? It's always at least some kind of a mixture.
It was
So they
before
come-
that. When I taught Sunday school at Sinai 5 years ago, 95% of everybody in my pre-bar mitzvah class was mixed marriage. I'm trying to remember, oh yes, the only ones who weren't were the older ones. But otherwise, I was unbelievably shocked. I coming from New York and stuff, I had no idea that the numbers were like that.
And we may have more of a, quote, problem or a group of it because of where we live. You know, likely if one were in a shul in Baltimore City or LA or wherever, New York, likely the demographics would be different.
It's the same thing is that way now, unless you get into
I was gonna say, it depends
a
on
more
what we're,
orthodox area.
it depends upon where one is coming from.
Yeah, but on average in the United States, what is it, 50 or 60% of Jewish kids intermarry? Plus, about 50% of kids grow up in one parent family. So yeah, there are pockets of this and that some places, but in overall, the tradition doesn't mean that much to our children. That's the point. They look for their own path, and some kids do feel like they need to do something spiritual, not just social justice, but spiritual. But But tradition part of, and Judaism consisted much more than Christianity, I think, of tradition, okay? And that part is kind of almost gone in the United States. It's hard to find.
Tradition?
Except in small pockets, like in Long Island, New York now.
I don't know, it depends on how you define tradition. To me, come Passover, the tradition is, I will go to a Seder at TBOR or Sinai, or whatever. That's now the tradition.
But what about your children?
They go too.
Yeah.
I know, my daughter holds a Seder, or she goes to a friend who has a Seder for 40 or 50 people, which may as well be. But, they kind of go through that kind of a tradition. Same thing with Friday night services. They go because it's a tradition.
But would you be upset if, for example, your children marry out of faith?
As long as they're happy, because eventually they will come to the problem of what they do with their children. And when their children's friend says, "What are you?" My son, I left when they were 4. He's never been bar mitzvah. The only time he goes to temple when he comes here, and he happens to be at the right time, and he goes. Okay. Ask him what he is. He's Jewish. Has no concept of anything, but he's Jewish.
Isn't there a return at a later age because of this? That, okay, so when we get to the Jewish section of this, he says people are doing good and that's all fitting within Jewish faith. But don't we find that people at some point are actually, it's talking about spirituality. It's talking about losing my religion, so you're not just doing a rote function. Many people have actually gone into questioning what it is they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing and what it means to them in a contemporary view. I think that, what you find is that people are coming back to traditions, but they're doing it with a different level of understanding than what they have previously done.
Lovely theory. Our current statistics in the current article
Buck
only
that.
suggest that there's a growing category called "so what?" or religion. I mean, normally when people check themselves in the hospital, right, choose a religion, right? Because you want to know who they're going to have come visit you, right? When the chaplain comes, right?
You want the exit strategy.
I may want no one, but I don't want,
Okay, so there's a growing number who are in that category of none.
Then why do I see so many middle-aged converts coming towards Judaism? From my perspective, it's a microvision, and yet at the same time, I see evidence that people return at an older age. And that this, if we were to take it and put it into a statistic of age groups, we might actually find a bell curve where it swings out into the so what, and then it starts coming back.
Could be. Usually people do tend to find or want to find a rabbi or someone when there's life ritual changes kinds of things. So whether it's b'nai mitzvah, if it's a bris, if it's a wedding, if it's a,
retirement.
A funeral, certainly. And sometimes they only come for those life cycle events and then they're gone again.
Right, that's another problem that synagogues face is that the families only show up when their children are, 12, and then when the last children is, ready to graduate high school, poof, they're gone.
But traditional churches face exactly the same.
So it would be interesting to take this article further.
Yeah, let's finish it. Well, let's take it further. Let's finish the article. Don, you want to read the next paragraph and then Tom pick it up
For them, the Almighty is off the radar, like some tiny foreign country they know exists but never think about it.
God's purpose, you don't need an opinion for those things to function. It says
Suhash Sridhar,
26, an engineer working in a computer company in Manhattan. Raised in New Jersey by his devoted Hindu mother and
staunchly
atheist father. I was saturated by both views, and after a while I realized I don't need either perspectives. There may be an unanswerable question that could be cool or fascinating, speculating in a fun parlor game. But they don't shed any meaning to life, he says.
Okay, so we've got a number of different anecdotal notes. We've got a guy who's, devoutly Hindu mother, atheist father. has shed those kinds of thoughts, he's free to choose his own path. He's 26, that's what he's doing. In addition to the number of anecdotal notes, the 27-year-old animator filmmaker in New York, the guy who's looking at an online dating service and calling himself under the religion category of spiritually apathetic. So, goodness more than godliness.
Yeah, too.
Okay, so you can
This
think
is
of
a
that.
disaster for Christians, says Scott McConnell, director of Lifeway Research. If you're not worried about heaven, you won't notice or care if Jesus is essentially your salvation. You're not thinking about any consequences, McConnell says. But Rabbi Micah Greenstein of Temple Israel, Memphis, and I'm assuming that's not Egypt,
Right.
is not so alarmed. He sees people behaving spiritually, caring for each other in the world. Even if they skip the label, Judaism teaches that spirituality is practical. When you see something that is broken, fix it. When you find something that has been lost, return it. When you see something that needs to be done, do it. In that way, you'll be taking care of the world and fulfilling your role as God's partner, know it or not.
Mm-hmm.
The rabbi says spirituality is about
The relational.
Whether you are relating to God or to others, to the world or to yourself, do you?
I do.
I do believe most people see life more as a mystery than as a machine. I would call that God.
I would call that God.
Thank you. Even if they don't.
And what a very interesting sort of like perspective on Judaism. Most people see life as a mystery, not a machine. Therefore, whatever your concept or construct of God is, if you're out there, doing the things that you're supposed to be doing, you're fulfilling what's required with regard to practical Judaism, regardless of your faith or lack thereof.
Right.
At least according to Rabbi Greenstein.
Rabbi Rockless, when we were in Southern California, made the statement, God is however you wish to see the concept. Whatever you're comfortable with, when your mind
I
is
don't
God.
know that is unique to Rabbi.
No, I didn't say it
Rockless.
was, but I'm quoting what I heard.
Okay.
And apparently it made a impression on Maryland, who didn't care for the Michelangelo version.
And there was a comment on Facebook from David Chaim Smith, and he said a true Kabbalist does not believe in a God. And I said, I believe that's true because it's beyond our concept. We've created a tradition that connects us to what is beyond our ability to conceive.
Well, yes, although I would also comment that
Like a
when
recipe.
he wrote a God with a small g,
He did.
no dash,
He did.
which is a whole other piece. But that's a very unique
And-
kind of circumstance, and quite frankly, I signed off.
I
on
think
that.
I think religion is like a recipe.
Yeah.
Is the bread going to rise? Are you putting the right amount of yeast in? Is the yeast good? And it's a recipe, and the tradition is more than just a rote memorization, and it's how you connect to that makes your bread rise, so that it connects.
Which is where Hasidism would go with, you need the intention, you need the kavanah to actually make the bread rise, because otherwise it's not rising.
And
You
isn't
can do
that
whatever
kind
you
of
want,
what?
you've got to have the motivation and intention to do
And
it.
that's kind of what the article is touching on to. What is the motivation? That's what I think, because when people say, so what, they have to be able to connect with what they're doing. And
Well,
people
apparently
now
a lot
are,
of people aren't.
but they are to some degree.
A lot of
I think
people
you would like to find that in the article, but I'm not sure the article says that.
No, it doesn't say that. It says, so
working
what?
in the real world, in engineering offices all my life, the football and whatever else they think people are concerned with,
That's what they're
people
concerned
are talking about, and they genuinely do not think about it. It's beyond the frame of reference. And there are people like you, for example, you think that it's just natural to be spiritual, but it's Not necessarily.
I think, you know, people might be spiritual when when they're not even aware, because technically, everybody contains God. God is in everybody.
No, that's in your view.
Well, how about all the expressions?
Even in that
God,
statement, God is in that statement. I mean, it's in all things. I mean, it's the paradox.
Not necessarily. That's what you want to believe.
No,
That's not necessarily.
it's beyond what I believe. It's,
And I'm not going there at this point.
30.4 million people don't believe in any religion or practice.
Right.
That many people can't be wrong.
And how many people walk away from religion every day?
But a larger number do believe in God or Christ.
But you know, when you find like
Let-
society, like American society, it
It-
changes
No, because
so
they
fast.
don't know anything else.
That it's
Oh,
very hard
let's
to
have
change.
first off, let's have one person speak at a time. Let's finish the article and then like continue our little discussion here. So who's up? We still have one more paragraph to go.
Bob Dillon, who lives in Broad Run, Virginia, is more inclined to talk about goodness than godliness. I try to live my life the best I can. I figure if I do good, thank you, and good things will happen. I am not all worried about the afterlife. How could they turn me down when people, whatever they want during the week? I missed something here.
When people do whatever they want to do.
During the week, thank you. They go to church all the time, but come home, they gamble, they party, they use God's name in vain. So either it will be like the switch is turned off, or it's done, or
So he's talking about the afterlife. So either it'll be like a switch turned off and it's done, or
if there is a heaven, I'm going to have to do some talking to get there. Until then,
And that's called an agnostic.
Until then, every week he faithfully drives to Catholic church, where he says, "I drop off my mother-in-law, get back in the car, and drive home."
okay, so, and then there's just a couple questions at the bottom here. Is this a problem? Should we be concerned? Is it enough to be a good person? Is it a symptom of apathy? The Yetzer Hara, skepticism, or is it honesty? So is that a problem or not a problem? What's our, I mean, obviously we're here studying Talmud, regardless of our belief or lack of belief in God.
what does
We're here
Israel
working
mean?
on it. Pardon?
What does Israel mean? One who wrestles with God. What does that mean?
Okay.
Well,
Very good.
well, that's a great statement,
Yep.
but yet it absolutely means that nothing unless you're a believer.
So otherwise one's wrestling with oneself.
Of course, it's always a wrestle with yourself. Who's your own worst enemy? It's yourself. Who gets you into trouble more than
But-
anything else?
But
It's
there is one
yourself.
practical, I think, in Jewish synagogues all over the place, that we cared for each other, okay? And this is part of the tradition, really. It's not, I don't know, well, of course, there is some Hillel that said something about caring of your brother, Hashomer Achi, and all this thing that we have to care for our brother. But when you look at all the generation, even in our temple here, in Emmanuel, there were people there, all the women, some of them were not even religious, that did enormous amount for our community, our congregation, and community also, by the way, yeah. And the newer generation doesn't, there is, the individualism in the United States is just absolutely overwhelming. Everybody is just me, like pleasure now and think later, And it's part of, I don't know, it's not necessarily religion, but there was this traditional framework that the United States breaks down. It's used to be in all the countries. It's not always positive too, but there was this positive aspect here that our temple benefited from all the generation of women that devoted their lives to it, okay? And my generation of women are disconnected, really. They don't even know what it is.
And I hear that. I think that there's some programs that are trying to bring it back, like Rosh Chodesh, and to sort of like get the concept and construct of we do things and we do things as a group, and we try to be a cohesive group and care about our community. Don?
Okay. When you peel the onion, you begin to look for some of the causes. I find part of the problem is religious leadership and lack thereof what we are turning out as rabbis are not leaders. Whatever their game plan is, it's not leadership.
Do you think it's unique to the Jewish culture?
I have no idea. I can only speak from what I see.
Okay, so
You
let
know?
me share with you that my understanding is this is across the board within religions. It's not just our religion. It's across the board in terms of people getting into the so what or the none category and being perfectly okay with that. Like, I'm here to live for today and there it is.
But
Just remember when you distribute your seat or here on your counter.
You're awesome. Thank you kindly.
Barbara, there's a card somewhere. Please take it. We're making a donation to
It's-
TVOR, and I want to make sure the card goes out.
Try, check at my
to
desk,
the,
there's an envelope.
Goldbergs. I'm
Thanks.
making
To
a
the-
donation, but I wanted to send it.
So a little footnote
Not where-
about the sentence with Rabbi Greenstein.
Greenstein.
So Temple Israel Memphis is a 1,600 family member congregation in Memphis, the largest Reform synagogue in Memphis. It's useful to know that. So
Yeah, it doesn't
his-
say that in
What a
here.
great thing.
His thoughts
Yeah.
of well, he doesn't see any limit to the number of of caring, compassionate people in his community. Well, yeah, he probably does 100 bar mitzvahs a year. He probably has very overflowing classes, and he has his own little center of his world, which is way different from Reno, Nevada,
Well,
with splinter congregations and.
I remember in Southern
And that's it.
California,
Thank you for sharing that perspective because it's kind of interesting to know the details behind
in
it.
Southern California, I remember Rabbi King, and he would throw out fiery sermons, not necessarily that I agreed with him on all of the sermons, but nevertheless, the passion, you had to just sit there and listen, because this wasn't just, he was fire and passion, and you just kind of were enthralled, to hear his commitment. But those are kind of rare, kind of thing. You don't have rabbis who, now we get drushes, we don't get sermons,
Yeah, it's true.
What does that mean?
It means, I know exactly, a parallel thing happened to the rabbis I grew up with. That when I was a child, Rabbi Giddon spoke in the same fashion, with all kinds of passion and it's different than sort of an analysis of the parsha or something, which is a lot of what you get now. And even sort of more recently, there's a huge difference between the current rabbi at Bet Shalom San Francisco and the rabbi before him of blessed memory, just in terms of the level of commitment, the level of stuff that they go into during the sermon. Huge difference. I don't know how widespread it is. I don't know if you could generalize that and say.
I can only go from my own
Right.
experience,
I happen to agree with both of them. I think the rabbis took off from school and cut school the day they taught theatrical, the part of being a rabbi. How to emphasize, how to
But
sit
this
there
was
and
not
write
only
write a sermon and be passionate about it.
It wasn't theatrical.
It might even
That's the
I
point.
have-
They actually believe.
Yes.
I have a very hard time getting passionate over a little squiggly light bulb that was made in China. I'm sorry.
well,
It just doesn't do anything for me. But talk about the environment as a whole. Talk about Jewish life as a whole. Talk about reaching out to help someone who's fallen down. And that might excite
But
me.
the rabbi is a reflection of the society, okay? If society is
it
individualistic,
should be
you
leading,
cannot
not
expect
trailing.
rabbis to be much different. They still want to make their salary and to
Well, that's
live
one of the problems.
and drive a BMW. That's it.
Well,
There's
I
also instances of
remember-
rabbis being fired, say they give the wrong sermon about how Israel did the wrong thing here or something like that. They give an anti-negative Israel sermon, and rabbis have been fired over that.
Well, it
So-
used to
so
be, I
rabbis can't
remember
actually
the
be
sermons
honest.
were
They have to think
controversial.
carefully.
But in that controversy, I can still remember, I still think about the controversy in the sermons,
Yeah.
which means it made an impression on me, And I walked out mumbling, thinking about it, to this day.
Diane, you've got a comment?
Well, it's just, I think society's in a dialectical format where you have a shift and change in the format of how religion is integrating in a changed society. What once was traditions isn't as easy to accommodate in a society that demands more of your time. Time has become an issue. So there's this dialectical format going on with technology and what people have to give and how they can be involved. I think the whole thing is in one of those processes of coming back together, but it's how those pieces are going to come back together that won't be like the past. So what you grew up with will not be in the future, and what you see in the present is what is evolving into meeting people's
Well,
needs.
In your whole life, what's the most, your whole life, I'm not referring to your Jewish life or your, you choose. What was the most memorable sermon you ever heard?
Well, actually, it was probably the Baptist minister that lived next door, and he had a brood of kids, and wasn't going to church so much, so it wasn't a sermon. It's what we did, because we would actually go out and we would do. And it was as a group, and I remember as a kid, that's what had the most impact on me. And of course, he was really passionate as a Baptist minister. He was like, whoa.
Alan, what was the most?
Actually, it was this Shabbat 3 years ago. A Baptist minister came to Emmanuel because of it was Martin Luther King weekend, and we took public swap and gave the most wonderful sermon. But it was really filled with
Passion.
with passion and fire.
Yeah. How about for you?
It's just so hard for me to separate one moment.
Pick one.
She's got many. She has
Something
many.
that really turned you on, got you excited.
You got that many, just pick one.
I don't know, coming first time to Leningrad, for example, and seeing the synagogue with all that, and I think it was, I didn't think that synagogue was necessary for Jewish survival. And here I came in, the entire huge structures filled with Jews, and some of them speak Yiddish and some Hebrew, and I can just walk in and speak Hebrew there. And I just came from Siberia where we had a very small community, and my father was the only one who did the Kaddish over the graves of whoever wanted to, the Kaddish to be said. So I think this was, absolutely amazing moment.
Rabbi, what was, for you, what was the most memorable sermon?
Skip town.
I didn't skip time.
And Monica.
Can't
You know,
remember.
You got to remember Monica too.
Certainly a couple, like when Judy's like mentioning that, I'm thinking being in Stephen S. Wise and seeing like 2,000
Oh,
Jews in the same,
That's one of my
humongous
memorable
and
ones, Stephen
huge. Although I can't even begin to like remember what might have been the sermon, just, not even. And one in Chicago where I was so floored that the rabbi spent the entire sermon railing, on some political note, and I just thought how horrible that was. I was like, I can't believe he spent the entire, whatever.
In Chicago?
Yes, I was like,
Seriously?
it was a whole political kind of like, why would he do that? But anyway, that was just, those are, a couple that come to mind.
Monica.
Well, I had a couple. My first one was here. When I came here and I didn't know what the heck was going on, and yet there was such a sense of community, I didn't feel like I needed to run out the door. It was amazing to me. And then when I was 15 years old, I was on the, up in the Four Corners, in Monument Valley, with a friend's church group. And we were working with an Eruvin about a month, and it was monsoon season and unbelievable rains, and very simple people who basically lived in the mud at that time, and it just really, I don't know, it was just an amazing time to realize the earth and
So is what you were doing.
spirituality, yeah, and the people, and
John, there's only two of us left.
Okay.
Well, has Don given his view?
But he's gonna skip me.
When Beth did a service in South Lake Tahoe, and that one, first time I've ever really heard her do a sermon, I said, wow. And I still
I'm
remember,
glad
it
that
was
would
like,
made an impression somewhere.
yeah, and then I realized that she definitely,
If I could text on Ustream, I'd go, wow.
Well, the only reason I did call him Don spoke before about the memorable sermons.
Well, the two that I remember, one was at Stephen Weiss, it was many, many, many years ago. And the rabbi basically talked about the people who did nothing, who basically sinned by not doing anything. And it was really kind of thing as you went through, because, said, hey, I don't sin, I'm a good guy, I haven't beat up anybody, killed anybody, stolen from anybody, jumped on anybody's wife. But he went through all the stuff that you do by doing nothing. The second was Rabbi King in Orange County, who spent 30 minutes railing on Jews for Jesus and the people who try to convert. And he was spewing poison. And then he was like, wow, just the passion. I didn't agree with him. But to this day, I can remember it and go through it in my mind, kind of thing. Now, Myra was, I don't know her early years, but she was a rabbi who basically stood up. She stood up for a lot of causes that were not popular. For example, lesbianism. Not so much homosexuality, but definitely lesbian. She would go down, she got arrested one time, I guess, or maybe more than one time, for something she did downtown at some kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, as a rabbi, she was passionate regarding what she believed in.
Thank you. And Mike, was there something else you were going to say?
Well, yes. The most memorable sermon that I ever listened to was a sermon on giraffes.
And that's why you use giraffes every time you're doing your sermon?
That's correct. Not every time. But, when I talk about it, when I gave the sermon, I stole part of the sermon, and I gave Rabbi Kaplan a blessing and memory credit for it. And why giraffe? Because a giraffe sticks its neck out. And that
Giraffes what?
Stick their neck out. And that
Are
really
you
struck
sure they
me.
do, or they just built that way?
It's an analogy for how they're built.
Yeah.
It really put me in a position to think a lot about, whether I should be involved in the community or not involved, or willing to put my head out there and chop.
More like a turtle.
No.
Go back in the shell.
So thank you, Don, for bringing this article. I think it's interesting, just in terms of its perspective. Certainly us, quote, on the inside, tend to think that, well, for those people who choose not to have a religion, I guess it's their choice. We live in a free society, and people are, able to make good choices as well as perhaps not so good choices.
I have a problem with the study, because I agree it's essentially age sensitive. People typically, teens, 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s, they think they're immortal. There's nothing. They're busy trying to survive, have children, send them to school, pay their mortgage, worry about losing their jobs. So it's a whole different strategy in terms of how you look at things and put them in importance.
Which is why perhaps maybe as Jews we push so hard on education, because there's only a few ways that we're actually going to change who we are, to examine our life, to see what it is that's important. As an attorney, I can tell you I've had people in my office that completely shock me because they're looking truly for perfection and they're not finding it. And as a result, there really is kind of this empty sort of ish space, and they think this or that is going to satisfy who they are. They haven't figured it out yet. They're kind of on this journey. One woman in particular came to my office. Her teeth looked perfect, but she wanted to do a dental malpractice lawsuit because something was like a millimeter off here. And I said, smile for me. Let me see your teeth. Honestly, it looks like any supermodel I could ever imagine. And I'm looking at her thinking, and exactly you want to do what? Her quest was for perfection of literally her teeth, her mouth. She was looking for perfection, but really in reality, what's the story behind that? The metaphor is, we're all looking at some level to find that internal peace. We're looking at our studies to kind of explore, to study, to get this grasp, pull on the threads, of God, bring God into our lives, whatever that means to each of us.
Okay, people today do not recognize miracles when they actually happen.
People don't recognize the miracle of the fact that we get up every morning. And where is it that we go when we sleep? But our tradition provides us answers to all of those kinds of questions, right?
But in
A bracha when
Wikipedia,
we start our day.
I've had this discussion with my friend Les Cohen, and I said, Wikipedia says, definition of a miracle, it's a statistically improbable event. It's something statistics says has a very low probability of occurrence. And yet, there it is, it happened. What was it, I was watching the news yesterday? Some gal in Australia jumped to a bungee 33 stories.
The one
The
that
rope
broke? Yeah, I saw
And
it.
she came out alive. Is it a miracle?
She'd be mentioned Gomel if she were Jewish, right?
Huh? But statistically speaking, the probability of her coming out alive was very low.
Well, actually, she
They
went
had
in
it
the
on
water,
film.
And
Right,
it
but
comes
look-
back down physics that she got right to.
That's
before she could-
that's how the miracle occurred.
No, the bungee broke.
It
Right.
broke, but it broke at the time as it started coming back up. So right there.
She was
Look
very
like it.
close
There's
to
just
the
like,
water.
it's like jumping from
But
that
does
point.
that make
So
it
it
any
didn't
less
have
of-
as much velocity because she
Didn't
was
have any
close.
button.
But
It
it
started,
didn't make it
you
any
know,
less of a miracle.
No.
Was this any less of a miracle?
Yeah.
No,
It
this
was
is just
definitely a
how
miracle.
the miracle occurred. It was a
It
miracle.
was a miracle that it broke at that
But in
moment.
essence,
Right.
it's called a statistically improbable.
Okay, so there was a miracle.
Well,
Now,
if
how
it
many
broke when
people
it's like
jumped
this,
after that?
It'll be a tragedy.
That would be
Nobody.
a miracle, right?
But it already started, coming.
So for those of us who have the rose-colored glasses and can see God everywhere, great. And for those people who don't have the rose-colored glasses, they look at it and they say, well, it was just a matter of
That's
statistically
your point of
speaking,
view.
That's what happened because it broke right above the water. Of course that's what happened.
But that's like their struggle with God.
Of course.
But that's what engineering
That's-
training does.
Wait, one person because we can't all hear everything.
No,
That's your definition.
Mike,
Mike
and then
wants-
Don.
right.
Mike, then Don, then Diane. Mike.
That's your definition of the struggle with God. It's not, because I know people that have walked away from Judaism and God after being in some very risky. I have an uncle, jumped out of airplanes during the Second World War, got shot at. President of synagogues, very active, very religious, walked away from it about 4 years ago. But there's no God.
So some people have difficulties. Don, your comment.
I don't really know.
Okay, Diane, other comment?
Well,
And then moving into our text.
go ahead and move into the
All right,
text.
so we're on page 131. So this is the absent-minded disciple. Who's reading? And Alan, are you okay there? Do we need to move the tape? Because we're happy to do it. It's really easy.
It's not in his face.
Work on my 10, it's good.
So we're on one occasion, they did not enter the court until dark.
Wait, okay,
Right,
131 at the very bottom?
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. They didn't enter the court until dark. Good.
On one occasion, they did not enter court until dark. It was taught, Rabban
Gamliel.
Gamliel had a tube through which he could determine 2,000 cubits on dry land and 2,000 on sea.
Okay, so he was using some kind of dioptra, which is a astronomical device which has been replaced, but it's what they were using at the time.
If you want to know how deep a valley is, fetch a tube and look through it, and you will see how deep the valley is. And that is, Rashi explains that you would first need to establish how distances appear through the tube on flat land. If you want to know how high a palm tree is, measure its shadow and your shadow, and you will know how high the palm is. If you want to make sure that wild animals will not take up residence in the shade of a tomb, memorial, and that means the fear is that the animal may smell a corpse and drag it out, according to Rashi. Put up a cane at the 4th hour of the day and see which way its shadow falls. Then slope the memorial up and down from there so that it does not offer shade as that
At that
time of day.
And so what unique little tidbits of information, if you don't have animals that are having shade in front of this tube, then likely they're not going to be so close as to smell it, and then you won't have a problem. Okay, interesting pieces. Now we're going to deal with Nehemiah, who had a particular problem when he was walking. So remember, we're in tractate
Eruvin, and there's a Shabbat boundary.
Rav Halia's son Nehemiah was deeply engrossed in his studies and absent-mindedly walked beyond the Sabbath boundary. Rav Hizdah said to Rav Nachman, "Your disciple Nehemiah is in distress." Rav Nachman replied, "Then make a barrier with people." And 12 says, "Some men had presumably established a further boundary for themselves by means of an replied,
So that he can come back in. So this is kind of an interesting thought. We've got this guy who's apparently studying as he's walking, right? He's studying, he's walking, and he goes past the Sabbath boundary. But now according to this particular piece, how's he going to get back in? Now this is not something that we've dealt with, nor that we still have any halakha on currently. But there was a method, apparently, whereby people could surround him and allow him to come back in. So we find like a little unique piece on arrows at this period of time. This is similar to the situation where we've got a Kohen who goes to a grave, right? So there's some issue about allowing the Kohen to go to the grave, but wait, once whoever that person was buried and he was obligated in the Levaya to accompany, now he has to get back out of the cemetery, right? This is a similar kind of thing. So the Kohen's there, the burial's done, now he has a group that surrounds him and allows him in the center to walk back out of the cemetery. So,
And that did what for who?
I understand that halachic nuance is not your cup of tea.
You're correct.
But this is what they were talking about 2,000 years ago, and so this is what we're studying.
But what did it accomplish?
Well, the Kohanim, they're not supposed to walk in the graveyard
Unless
they
it,
walk on top of somebody.
unless it's a direct relative.
However,
And
no,
the
no,
direct
no.
relative is
That's
buried,
no,
then what?
No, but they're supposed to accompany, like, if you're a Kohen and your brother dies, you're obligated to accompany your brother and bury him. Once he's buried, then what do? You send him to the graveyard, and you're not supposed to walk across. You have no reason to be there. The funeral's over, yeah? How do you get out? So
Right, how do you
it
get out?
solves that problem.
That's the
I
issue.
think that's very clever.
You turn around and walk
Exactly.
back up.
And for those of us who are amused by these details of life, we find it very fascinating. But not everybody finds it fascinating. So anyway, who's up?
Let's see. Rav Nachman bar Isaac was sitting behind Rava, and Rava was in front of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman bar Isaac said to Rava, "What is Rav Hista's problem? Is it that there are enough men to make the barrier, but he wants to know whether the halakha is according to Rabban Gamliel, or were there not enough men to make the barrier? And he wants to know whether or not the halakha is according to Rabban Eliezer. Obviously, we must be dealing with a case where there were not enough men to make the barrier. For if there were enough men, what was the question? Hadn't Rav already said that the halakha was according to Rabban Gamliel in the cases of parak, prison, and boat? So we must be dealing with a case where there was not enough men, and the inquiry is as to whether the halakha is according to Rabbi Eliezer, who said that if someone had strayed 2 cubits beyond the boundary, he could not re-enter."
He could.
He could re-enter, Rashi. This is evident on close examination, since Rav Naaman said to him, "He can come in, surely come in implies without a barrier." Rav Nachman bar Isaac objected to Rava, "If the wall of the sukkah fell down, he may not stand people or objects there or prop up a bed to spread a sheet over the gap, since it is forbidden to make a new temporary tent on the festival, and even more so on the Sabbath."
Okay, somebody explain to me why is it and what is it that Rav Nachman bar Isaac is trying to prove here? What is he trying to prove, and how is he doing it? How about the how he's doing it? Let's do that.
Is it whether or not you could come in if you were 2 cubits outside, or you can't come in?
Yes, that's the question, right? And he's looking at that question by drawing a metaphor or a similar logic or line of thought about the wall of a sukkah. right? So here we've got some guy outside the boundary, right? And if there's not enough guys to, put, 3 in front, 2 on the side, 3 in the back, to completely encompass him. So maybe there was someone missing, like maybe right here, what do? What do? You don't have enough guys, right? You don't have enough guys, right? So his argument is he's using the issue about a sukkah, right? Similar kind of situation. You can't, quote, stand people or objects there or prop up a bedspread if one wall of the sukkah falls down. That's what he's drawing the argument or the line of thinking about what you do with a sukkah to this temporary eruv, this temporary boundary that they're creating to allow this absent-minded student, to walk beyond the boundaries to get back. Okay?
The question is, okay, what exactly is it? He's committed a sin by walking outside?
We're not talking
No.
sin or not sin. We're really talking about how to get this literally topless.
What if he just
How do we
turns
get-
around and walks back?
Okay,
But
so
but
we
he's
have
trying to
one
find a reason.
opinion.
Right.
One opinion says, come in.
You
So
you
what?
know, you messed up.
Come on.
Unmess, you
Okay.
know? That's why erasers are on pencils.
So we have another opinion which says you need people around them. And really, let's go where Don's headed, right? Because really where Don's headed is there's a whole other piece of this entire story which deals with Acher. Acher hops on a horse on Shabbat and rides off into the sunset, right? And his student is saying, Acher, don't, come back, come back. He's like, it's too late for me, I'm heading beyond the Shabbat boundaries. He's Acher and he's gone. So, can Acher just walk back in? Or does Acher need essentially a minion to bring him back in? Okay, can he come back? So this is the same level of metaphor, right? So we're drawing literary analogies. This is just another piece of Talmud, where Acher says, I'm going beyond the Sabbath boundary, don't come follow after me, Meir, you're stuck.
It only depends on the spirituality.
Okay, so we have Rabbi Nachman, aka Reb Mike, who's saying it's all about the joy in your heart. We need our kavanah, we need to connect with joy, and then we're good to go.
That allows him back in.
So just walk on back in with joy in your heart, by the way.
But that doesn't undo what you've done.
Okay, so then we have Reb Don, who is more the Shammai type, who would say, I'm so sorry, but really, you screwed up, bring, bring some kind of sacrifice to the
Right.
temple.
Okay, so now it'll take 2 sacrifices and walk back in, and it's gonna cost you. And that's the only way you're gonna learn, by paying.
Okay, and I read this little piece, this little thread today, which is a very lovely little piece, which said, essentially, and it's in Delbert Pinson's new book called Jewish Wisdom in the Afterlife. He's a lovely yeshivish kind of,
There's wisdom in the afterlife.
yeah, Jewish wisdom on the afterlife. On the afterlife. Essentially, it's avoid being judgmental. So when you have your life review, that we'll all have, God willing, at some level in Olam Haba, avoid being judgmental. Why? Because when we get to Olam Haba, we're going to be looking at our life and making some sort of decision. So if we were non-judgmental in life, if we judge with the Ankaf Zechut or judge with the hand of merit, then we'll also judge ourselves, God willing, with a hand of merit when we have our life review to do. Okay, so somebody's going to pick up the italics, Bavakasha?
Judy.
I think this is pretty interesting. The discussion isn't conclusive. Okay, so we do not know whether the absent-minded student was left standing until after the Shabbat. How do you define a boundary around a town, seeing that there is no obvious ways to do this unless the town is circular? Mishnah states that irrespective of the shape of the town, the boundary is to be squared off to a perfect rectangle based on the maximum extent of the town. Gemara, does it mean that it's more than how many feet? That's what it
Well, that's the question. When you have a town, towns aren't always
Yes.
exactly in a circle or exactly in a rectangle. So what do? Do you make it a perfect rectangle and then start your, 200 amot or 2,000 amot or not? How do you judge the edge of town is really, this particular issue.
Gemara clarifies that the rectangle is to be aligned north-south by east-west. This sparks off some technical discussion, leading to a consideration of the lapse of time between equinoxes and solstices.
Solstices. Yeah.
The editor has inserted here a collection of sayings on the value of learning Torah and the best way to study. These are remarkable for their down-to-earth quality, the warm humanity of several of the anecdotes, and the sense
Someone's at
that
the door.
they exhibit of joy and love in learning Torah. This selection begins with Joshua ben Hananiah's humorous reflections on being outwitted. These are all the more pointed as he was himself celebrated for outwitting heretics and unbelievers. Then come some anecdotes involving Beruria,
Yeah.
the wife of Rabbi Meir.
So I don't know if you all remember when we were studying as a driven lead, but we had the stages like we just spoke about, Acher, that kind of thing. And Rabbi Meir was one of the ones who was dealing with him, one of his disciples. So, okay, Beruria and the wife of Rabbi Meir, we have a little piece to learn about her. And so, go ahead and finish up that paragraph. If you would.
One of you women cited with evident admiration by the rabbis, though these proved rather too much for medieval commentators who fabricated scurrilous stories about her.
So do you remember the story of Beruria and her issues? Yeah. Okay, so we dealt with that when we dealt with as a driven lead. And Beruria is, we read here, it's the medieval commentators who said something about her. Because as we know from our stories, and we're going to actually come into a little bit of agadic work coming up, and let's just look at this real quick before we leave today. So at the bottom of 134, we'll leave the cliffhanger here. We'll just talk a little bit about this. At the bottom of 134, Rabbi Yossi the Galilean was on his way when he met Beruria. He said to her, catch these words, count them on your fingers. Ready? Which way do we go to Lydda? Okay, so how many words was that? Which way do we go
In
to
English, it's
Lydda?
7.
7. Okay. She said to him, stupid Galilean, didn't the sages say don't talk too much to women? You should have said, count these words, which way to Lydda?
4.
Okay. So instead of 7 words, say 4.
So we looking at Sephiroth?
Not here. But there's, we look at specifically what were the words that were taken out. Do we, right? So don't talk too much to women. Don't imply maybe something like when you say the word we, anachnu, we, going to Lydda, right? So what she is trying to do is tighten up his language, saying, and actually she was kind of like pretty right out there. You stupid Galilean! Don't say too much to women. You should have just said these 4 words instead of those 7, right?
To say one word.
You could have said what?
Galileo?
Lydda? Which way?
Lydda.
Epho.
Info.
All right, so
Sure.
that's it. Okay, so we'll talk more about her and about a special needs disciple who had to review his studies 400 times.
I have a question. Is that true that in the olden